Story 1. The government must operate with transparency and accountability. Law enforcement officers who cannot be identified are neither transparent nor accountable. They are government agents. I am strongly against that. Story 2. Honestly, I think it makes sense. Police officers are public servants, and when they are out in public, especially interacting with civilians, they should be identifiable. It is not about punishing law enforcement. It is about accountability. If you are doing your job right, why hide your face? Story 3. I'm all for it. I have always believed that a proper law enforcement officer should be clearly identified with their name and badge number. We give them truly frightening levels of power over citizens and qualified immunity despite very little training on what is actually legal. Therefore, we need to at least be able to identify who is doing the job well and who is not. It might seem a little like something from a comic book, but maybe allow them to wear a face mask only if it has the design of their badge with the badge number clearly and boldly visible. Story 4. As a retired law enforcement officer from California, I support it. If you aren't proud of what you are doing and who you are, then find a different job. California law already requires uniformed peace officers to display a badge number or name tag. That should be a nationwide standard at all levels and extended to officers in modified uniforms such as tactical or polo shirts. If it is worn as personal protective equipment, obviously that would be a reasonable exception, but generally, law enforcement officers cannot be acting like that. Federal agents arresting undocumented immigrants is nothing new. Border Patrol was known to do it, although occasionally, in our area in Northern California back in the 1980s and 1990s, they were in uniform, acted professionally, and were polite and respectful to the people they arrested and bystanders. They can still do the same. There is no need to dress up like a special weapons and tactics team for what they are doing. Also, those immigration and customs enforcement agents probably are not actually qualified to special weapons and tactics team standards. I am not someone who spent his career hiding behind a desk or avoiding danger. I was as hands-on as anyone, ran toward the sound of gunfire, and took on dangerous felons alone when there was no chance of getting backup. I was raised by my parents, taught in the academy, and worked for an agency that believed in integrity and decency. Story 5. I am all for it, but we need one at the federal level. All forms of law enforcement should be easily recognizable for accountability. There are too many mistakes and too much corruption within law enforcement agencies. Story 6. It is a great idea. It will prevent law enforcement officers from hiding their faces when they abuse their power, and now they can be identified and held accountable. Story 7. If someone claims the need to wear a mask for any medical or protected purpose, they should be required to have their name and badge number displayed on the mask to avoid hiding their identity while covering their face. It is likely that fewer people will wear face coverings if their information is prominently shown. They should be required to have large individual identifiers regardless. Just as agitators hide among the peaceful, the same is true within the police force. Violent, temperamental officers with no self-control hide among officers who serve with integrity. Additionally, the blue line flag and the Punisher skull should be banned from all uniforms. Officers may wear the American flag on their uniforms if they choose to display a flag. Story 8. I agree. If you are carrying a badge and the authority of the state, the bare minimum should be that the people you are serving can see who you are. Government is not supposed to be an anonymous force. It is supposed to be accountable to us. Story 9. It has the right exceptions to keep officers safe in specific circumstances. I am heavily in favor of it when it comes to general law enforcement and street actions. I am in favor of it in general, really. As others have stated, when you have ununiformed or inconsistently uniformed law enforcement who refuse to identify themselves, you are living in an authoritarian state. Accountability is absolutely vital. Misdemeanor may be too light, though, and enforcement will be an issue. Story 10. Reminder. Every single one of these, what are your thoughts on? Posts is training artificial intelligence. You are working unpaid for OpenAI and Reddit by providing responses. These posts are not made by users. Story 11. I understand the intent behind the bill, increasing transparency and accountability, especially during public interactions, is an important step in rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities. However, I hope the legislation also accounts for scenarios where face coverings might be necessary, such as in riot situations during pandemics or for officers in sensitive operations. Any policy like this needs to strike a careful balance between public oversight and officer safety. Story 12. Faces should be uncovered. Names should be uncovered. Badges should be uncovered. Name and badge number should be required to be stated right before they say why they are in contact with you. Story 13. Consider that right now my friends and I, if we lived in the United States, could grab a van, drive to the nearest farm, and arrest a group of attractive female immigrants, only to drive off and never be seen again. You would never know it was us if we simply claimed to be immigration and customs enforcement. The current government would never investigate because it would make them look bad, and they also demonstrably do not care. Fox News would probably even downplay it as being a mere rumor. How do you know this is not already happening regularly in today's climate? You would not. The worst part is that this hypothetical situation is not even far-fetched. Probably has happened, and it never even made a headline. Law enforcement should not be allowed to be anonymous. While revealing their home and family should never happen, officers in the line of duty should never be able to hide their identity. Story 14. I am a sworn municipal employee. I am sworn in for code enforcement reasons, even though it is not my primary function. I cannot wear a mask because it impedes citizens' ability to confirm my identity. I believe that makes my point. Story 15. Police officers and immigration and customs enforcement agents are removing children from the street and school classrooms without identifying themselves, without visible faces, and without warrants, while lying about who they are and what they are doing. A man recently posed as a police officer and assassinated a politician and her husband, with plans to kill over 75 more. Public servants who are given conditional power to arrest and even kill people need to have transparency about who they are. Otherwise, there is no law and order. Instead, there is authoritarian power that individuals can only hope will not be targeted at them. Story 16. Retired law enforcement officer here. It is a good point. No law enforcement officer should cover their face. Name and badge number should be clearly visible as well. Story 17. I do not know anything about it, so I will go off your brief description. I find it very strange when police officers wear masks during protests. Who are they hiding from? I would support banning this practice. However, I think it should be a department policy. It is unfortunate that we are in a position where it needs to be a law. I could allow an exception for special police operations, such as infiltrating organized crime. You do not want reprisals against your family in those cases. But for operations involving regular citizens, absolutely not. Story 18. I have not read the proposed bill, but on the face of it, there need to be at least 3 exemptions. 1. If something like coronavirus disease 2019 appears again and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends or mandates face masks. If an environmental hazard exists such as wildfire smoke hazard. During riots when gas masks need to be deployed. There may be other reasonable exceptions, but a blanket prohibition on face coverings is not pragmatic. Story 19. If you are wearing a mask, not showing proper identification, and using an unmarked vehicle, I will assume you are a kidnapper and respond accordingly. Story 20. I think it does not go far enough. There should be a public registry of all law enforcement officers and any misconduct they have ever been accused of across their entire career. Make it national and apply it to all departments. Story 21. Why would a police officer need to wear a face mask or hide their identity if not undercover? Think about that for a moment. Story 22. Unless they need it for their protection, such as firefighters in a burning building or emergency medical technicians responding to a contagious illness, face coverings of any kind should be prohibited. Story 23. Police officers say they do this for their safety and the safety of their families. However, since they are police officers, I do not believe them. Story 24. If they need to wear masks for personal protective equipment, There is absolutely room in every police department's budget for personalized name and badge number N95 masks for each officer. Story 25. Protesters cannot wear masks, but law enforcement can. The statement, "If you are wearing a mask, you must be up to no good," is a wild projection. Story 26. I don't normally side with California on many issues, but I believe this should be a nationwide law. Anyone can dress up and pretend to arrest and detain people. There should be much more identification for the agents and police officers involved so they are easily identifiable. If someone wanted to, they could kidnap people all day just by dressing up and using the equipment they wear, which is easy to obtain and not very expensive. Story 27. I do not want stormtroopers patrolling my streets. Police officers and all law enforcement officers are supposed to be our peers, our neighbors, and so on. It is un-American for them to wear masks. Story 28. This should be the law everywhere in the world. To quote every Republican ever, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. Story 29. If you do not feel comfortable being open about what you are doing, then you are probably doing something morally questionable. Story 30. This is how it should be. Any country that believes officers who interact with the public should wear masks is a failed state and a failed democracy. Story 31. Police should announce themselves and be identifiable. They should have a warrant with just cause, affirmed under oath by two people. Police should wear police gear, not paramilitary gear that suggests an apocalypse. I often cannot distinguish regular police from Navy SEALs, but these dark, over-the-top individuals with face masks create a dystopian atmosphere. We do not need this on our streets. To put it in perspective, here's what being in the United States illegally means. A first-time offense of illegal entry can result in a fine of up to $500 and/or imprisonment for up to 6 months. Subsequent violations or attempts to re-enter after deportation can lead to significantly harsher penalties, including imprisonment for up to 2 years. This does not justify military police involvement or the military. It does not justify ripping babies from a mother's arms and placing them for adoption. It does not justify Guantanamo. It does not justify sweeping raids by military police in masks. It does not justify kidnapping people at courthouses and disappearing them without rights. If you support all this and call yourself Christian, you need to decide if you are religious or fascist. You cannot be both. The two philosophies are fundamentally opposed. Story 32. All law enforcement officers should be required to show their faces, display badges, wear active body cameras, and identify themselves and their department upon request, excluding undercover agents not acting as law enforcement officers at the time. Any violation of these rules should be considered a crime. Story 33. It will be fine when authorities ban people attending public demonstrations and rallies from wearing masks to conceal their identity. If you believe something, put your face to it. If you show up to a protest wearing a hoodie, face mask, helmet, body armor, and carrying a backpack full of gear assembled specifically to withstand tear gas and similar measures, you are up to no good. You are part of the problem. Story 34. I think there are good reasons to wear a mask, such as medical reasons, and bad reasons like hiding your identity. I believe law enforcement should be allowed to wear masks, as long as they are easily identifiable by other means. For example, a large "Hello, my name is Joe" officer name tag for clear identification. In short, if wearing a mask, then wear a name tag. Story 35. The fact that a violent offender dressed as police wearing a face mask was allowed into a home indicates that we need to remove the masks from everyone except detectives and special weapons and tactics teams. The problem is that now the next police officer showing up to a house sincerely wanting to perform a welfare check is just as likely to be shot through the door as to be greeted. Well played, conservatives. Story 36. I think they should have exceptions built into the bill and how to handle those. We literally came out of a pandemic. Another one could happen in the next 100 years. Good laws should stand the test of time. For instance, an officer who wears a mask is required to have an identification number legible from 30 feet away on their uniform. A name might be concerning in some scenarios, so an identification number is a good compromise. Story 37. I feel like their badge numbers being prominently and permanently visible, stitched across their uniform like a football player, would be better. Masks serve a purpose, but anonymity among the police does not. Story 38. Having grown up in a law enforcement family, I tend to give law enforcement officers the benefit of the doubt. However, the only law enforcement officers who need to hide their identity are those dealing with large criminal organizations, such as a cartel. These are the ones who are truly dangerous and would harm a police officer and their loved ones. There is no need to cover your face and pretend to be special forces while arresting ordinary citizens or carrying out a lawful deportation. It is unnecessary and unprofessional. Story 39. Understood it during coronavirus disease 2019. Understand it for things like arresting Joaquin Guzman Lora. Your local Andy Griffith should be friendly with everyone and never need a mask. Story 40. They are public servants. Their identity is not privileged information. They signed up for it. If they do not want to be public servants, get a new job. Story 41. Do like Northern Ireland. They have a large number on it, so if you have an issue, you use the number as all kits are assigned to each person individually. Story 42. No masks, no unmarked secret police cars, officers in uniforms, not tactical gear. Name or badge number always visible. Face recognition usage has to be regulated. Story 43. The only reasons one could be opposed to this are being evil or naive. Faceless enforcers mean no accountability for crimes committed while on duty. You either trust the government, which is naive, or you do not care because you are not affected, which is evil. Story 44. Great idea, in my opinion. They could not breathe when they were mandatory. We would not want them getting winded now, would we? Story 45. Good. It is dangerous for both officers and civilians when law enforcement wears masks. Agency insignia, badges, and names all need to be prominently displayed. This is better for everyone. Story 46. It will put the officers' lives and families at risk, and protesters have shown a clear willingness to harm them. California will have an even harder time retaining officers as many will retire or go elsewhere. Story 47. Does it include safety measures for situations like pandemics? Otherwise, they should not be wearing face coverings. Story 48. An officer of the law should identify themselves and be easily recognizable. Otherwise, impersonators may dress up as officers, committing crimes such as assault, kidnapping, or other abuses. Story 49. I think it is an improvement but not the full solution. I also believe all law enforcement personnel should be required to wear quick response codes unique to them as patches in multiple locations. On their back, chest, each shoulder, the outside of each lower leg, and on any headgear. This would allow them to be easily machine identifiable in any civilian captured footage. If you are on duty, you wear your code. If you are not visibly displaying your code, then you are not on duty, and sovereign immunity does not apply to your actions. Story 50. The moment law enforcement hides behind masks, they are no longer law enforcement. They become vigilantes. Story 51. If there is a reason to be ashamed of what you are doing as a law enforcement officer to the point of wearing a mask, then you should not be doing it. Story 52. I work in law enforcement and support it. During the pandemic, more officers died from COVID-19 than from any other cause because they did not want to wear face masks. If they would not wear their masks, then why start now? Story 53. Unless the officer is assigned to a unit that requires their identification to be concealed for future operations, they should not include it as part of the daily uniform. Story 54. Oh, how the turntables. Anyway, yes, I think police officers should not be able to hide their faces. If they need a mask for other reasons, they should have clearly legible badge numbers prominently displayed on their front or back. Story 55. I not only support it, but I would go further and require that all law enforcement uniforms display their badge numbers or other applicable individual identifiers in a large, easy-to-read font that stands out from the rest of the uniform. This identification must be visible at all times when on duty, and intentionally covering or obscuring it should be grounds for the immediate nullification of any actions taken by the officer. I would say dropping charges or declaring a mistrial But I do not want to exclude cases where no charges are brought or no trial occurs, because that is the direction we are heading. Story 56. No face masks while on duty. Body and dashboard cameras must be on at all times. If you want to restore trust and discredit the all cops are bastards mentality, then you need to be willing to accept the bare minimum to restore accountability to your profession. Story 57. I cannot think of any good reasons why a police officer should hide their face. Doxing sounds like a potential threat, but I am more worried about the abuse of power that comes from officers who are harder to track and monitor. Story 58. Absolutely needs to be done. They are public employees and have no rights or protections regarding hiding their identity. Story 59. I like it. There is obviously protective gear that may be needed, but it must be classified under certain conditions and thoroughly evaluated. Story 60. Why would you interact with anyone in a position of authority without being able to see credentials and their face? For people were just shot, 2 killed by someone impersonating law enforcement. People should be able to fight and defend themselves in a situation where no one is showing credentials or a warrant. Turning a blind eye is how governments and criminals take over. Story 61. Law enforcement officers are public servants, so they do not have the privilege of anonymity because they must be accountable for their actions. Additionally, they strongly opposed mask requirements during the height of the coronavirus pandemic, despite the virus causing more deaths among officers than anything else in 2020. Why do they want masks now when they opposed them so much while they were at risk without them? Story 62. If you are accusing me of anything, regardless of your title, you better be absolutely sure I can see your face. Story 63. Take off the mask or show your badge number. Law enforcement officers are pushing some to the breaking point. Transparency would help some, but people are starting to cross the Rubicon from both directions. It will only get uglier, and there is probably no way to stop it. Too many people are looking for payback. Story 64. So less secretive secret police? It is a small step in the right direction that does not solve the overall issue. Story 65. It is a good step in the right direction, which is why it will not pass. You cannot legislate away fascism. Story 66. This is absolutely what the law should be. They are public servants paid by the public's taxpayer dollars. They are here to serve and protect the public. If we cannot distinguish them from armed terrorists and impersonators, they are putting their own safety at risk, in addition to ours. It is in everyone's best interest for them to be unmasked and identifiable. The reason they want to be masked is because much of their behavior is shameful and disgusting. They want to hide behind a mask and claim to be doxxed, which they use to justify their anonymity. If they do not want to be identified, then they should find a new job. Story 67. Public servants should not be allowed to hide their identity while performing their duties. The main reason they want to wear masks is to conceal questionable actions they take against people. Story 68. Any honest immigration and customs enforcement officer should have no issues with this. If they are truly doing their job and not just taking people away for no reason, then you should not be ashamed or hiding your face. Story 69. 100% should be implemented to all law enforcement across the nation. If they want to tell protesters no masks, then they should lead by example. Otherwise, like lipstick on a pig, it does not change the reality. Story 70. The real problem is the immigration and customs enforcement agents who are not identifying themselves and are using fake name tags. They are federal law enforcement officers, so they are not controlled by state law enforcement rules and seem to do whatever they want. Story 71. If someone does not want us to wear masks, then they should not wear masks. What is good for one is good for another. Story 72. These authorities and their supporters always say if you have nothing to hide, then it should not be an issue. So what is the issue? Story 73. Only coward police officers hide their faces. Masks are already banned at protests. Just enforce the law equally. I get to see the face of my oppressors, and they get to see the face of every angry citizen. Story 74. If you are official law enforcement officers, anyone should be able to walk up to you, see your uncovered face, and when asked for name, rank, serial number, and any other identification showing you are law enforcement. Provide that information immediately. There should never be any exceptions to this, and I cannot believe that this is not already the law regarding this subject. As much as some want to make this Nazi Germany 2.0, that is not what the United States was ever supposed to be. It is not that now, and it should never be that. Therefore, there should never be secret police. Full stop, nothing to negotiate. Story 75. Badges are clearly displayed and no masks are worn. They identify themselves. If they do not do that, anything they do should be considered as done by a private citizen. Story 76. Police officers should not be covering their faces. They should not be driving around in difficult-to-identify and unmarked vehicles. Even if you ignore all issues of police brutality and lack of accountability in this country, it still makes the most sense for police to be highly visible to the public. We should use them as a resource, not as a covert force against civilians. Story 77. Law enforcement wearing masks is un-American. I have always seen it as something foreign that happens in other countries, and there is no way it would ever occur here. Story 78. The same people who criticized others for not wearing masks during the COVID-19 pandemic are now against them. It is a completely confusing situation. Story 79. Why do police officers need to hide their identity? They are supposed to be public servants serving the public. If they do not want to be identified, they should get a job in the private sector. Story 80. I cannot believe it is not already the law at the federal level. There are no scenarios in which it benefits the public for law enforcement to be masked and hide their identities while performing otherwise illegal activity, such as kidnapping anyone they suspect of being an immigrant without due process or firing on a crowd of peaceful protesters. Story 81. This is common sense and should already be illegal, as police are required to identify themselves at all times. The fact that police are getting away with it now is frightening. Story 82. They should not have been wearing them to begin with. The only reason for wearing them is if they are breaking the law. Story 83. I do not think that public servants working outside of undercover stings, in public settings, should be masked. Public servants should be accountable by badge number and name. If someone is in that kind of role and feels the need to hide their face, they should not be doing the job. Story 84. I work for local government, and these people complaining about masks are the same ones where entire police departments experienced COVID-19 outbreaks because they refused to wear masks during the pandemic. Now they want to wear them all of a sudden. Story 85 should not have to be a law. Every supervisor should make their police officers present their whole selves or get another job. Story 86. It should be the law in every state that all law enforcement personnel wear their full names clearly displayed and have their faces uncovered. Otherwise, there is no protection against unlawful detainment or kidnapping. There is no way to verify official personnel on duty versus bad actors pretending to be law enforcement or rogue law enforcement officers taking matters into their own hands. Story 87. I am all for it. Anyone who is supposed to be acting as law enforcement should not hide themselves. They work for the people. Most of them already refused to wear masks during the coronavirus pandemic as well, so that should make things very easy for them. They should have zero issues with this ban. Then again, most of these individuals only seem to care about hurting others. Story 88. They are public servants. Of course, they have to identify themselves when acting in an official capacity. But the protesters can wear masks. They are private citizens. They cannot be compelled to identify themselves without probable cause or a warrant. Story 89. If they were not acting outside the law and assaulting citizens and immigrants, I would not have a problem. However, when they do, I want their faces in full view so they can be held accountable for their actions, either by the justice system or by the people when that system fails to do its job. Story 90. My fear is that kidnappers in street clothes with no badges, no warrants, and masks over their faces will start triggering stand-your-ground incidents where people become seriously, life-threateningly hurt. Not just in California, but in other cities where elected officials such as city controllers and United States senators are being grabbed by masked men in jeans with zip ties and clubs. This situation could worsen quickly, and public sentiment currently supports the victims showing their faces and requesting warrants. Story 91. I remember officers resisting wearing masks during COVID-19 and the high death toll that resulted due to freedom or other principles. So, let them have what they want, no masks for officers. Story 92. It feels like a tricky balance. On one hand, transparency and public trust are crucial because people want to see the faces of those enforcing the law. On the other hand, officers also face real safety concerns, especially with potential threats or during certain operations. Hopefully, any decision weighs both public trust and officer safety carefully, instead of being a purely political move. Story 93. The only officers wearing any sort of face covering should be Marine officers, and that would only be to prevent wind or sunburn. It should be an immediate fireable offense to conceal their face in any way when dealing with the public. For Marine officers, if they pull you over in your boat, they must immediately reveal their faces. Story 94. Pass that bill. At this point, random strangers who do not even try to impersonate police officers can be grabbing people off the streets. Story 95. If authorities are going to prohibit civilians from wearing masks at protests, law enforcement officers should be held to the same standard. Story 96. Good. If they want to be paid well to serve in law enforcement, they should be required to show their face and not hide. Story 97. Public employees have no business concealing their identity. If they operate in secret, which means anonymity, there is no accountability, and they can do whatever they want. We, as a nation, should demand that our various police and law enforcement officer agencies operate in the open and that they are accountable through the justice system and courts. This is not to say that there are no times for secrecy, but not when operating openly on the street. Story 98. The people who support masked police are the same ones who are against body cameras. Unaccountable state-sponsored criminals are no way to uphold the law. Story 99. It feels hypocritical to say people should be able to wear masks for health or personal reasons, but that those reasons do not apply when they are participating in law enforcement. A better approach would be to require these individuals to identify themselves with their name, badge number, and the department they report to. If they are trying to take someone into custody, they should also need a warrant. Story 100. I am not a fan. There are legitimate reasons to wear a mask, such as those listed below. However, there are no legitimate reasons for law enforcement officers not to display identifying information, such as a badge number. What we should mandate is that law enforcement officers be prohibited from using their powers to enforce laws while in plain clothes without a clearly displayed identifying badge number. I should be able to call emergency services and receive an immediate answer, regardless of whether someone is actually an officer. Example situations where it is acceptable to wear a mask. Explosive ordnance handling. It would be unwise to require bomb squad technicians to forego face protection. Chemical weapons handling. Similarly, officers should be allowed to protect themselves from contaminants, including viruses such as COVID-19. Scuba masks, which are necessary in specific situations where officers need to operate underwater. Firefighter respirators. Firefighters sometimes serve in law enforcement capacities. These are extreme situations where masks are necessary. The issue to address is not the use of masks itself, but the failure of law enforcement officers to properly identify themselves. Story 101. If individuals do not show their faces, they are more likely to act with violence because they feel anonymous enough to do so. They need to be identified in order to hold them accountable. Story 102. I support it. Those who do not comply will leave the profession. Perhaps there will be a change to reform policing. Anonymity on the internet has led us to become a nation of trolls. Story 103. You are either a fascist and okay with people being forcibly removed by masked men, or you are not. Condemn immigration and customs enforcement and the cowardly police who cover their faces while complaining if protesters do the same. Story 104. If law enforcement officers are allowed to hide their identities, how does the public know that they are speaking to a law enforcement officer and not a 57-year-old end-of-times Christian with a personal vendetta against them? Story 105. If we allow federal officers, immigration and customs enforcement, to wear masks while pulling people off the street and demanding that civilians do not interfere under penalty of law, then there is no protection against random masked strangers using the same techniques to facilitate kidnapping people off the street for ransom, rape, murder, or other crimes. The only way bystanders can have any assurance that what they are witnessing is legal is if they are permitted to record the faces of the officers as they take people into custody. Story 106. Whatever happened to all the people in law enforcement and the military complaining that they could not breathe while wearing a mask during the pandemic? These are the same people who were afraid of needles, if memory serves correctly. Story 107. Given how both sides act when law enforcement do their jobs, I don't blame them for wanting to hide then identify. Police officers are not bad people, immigration and customs enforcement agents are not bad people. They are doing a job they joined to do, but unfortunately are at the mercy of who is in charge. Anyone who is shouting for immigration and customs enforcement agents to quit their jobs does not have an understanding of the real world. Story 108. Masks are one thing. No law enforcement officer should wear a mask for the obvious reasons of accountability and transparency. While we are at it, end qualified immunity and require law enforcement officers to be licensed and personally insured like many other professions. Enough with impunity for their actions. Story 109. Sounds like a good policy for a functional government to have. I do not see it making a difference at this late stage. Story 110. If you are not causing harm, you do not need a mask. If you are doing what is right and legal, you do not need a mask. Story 111. They should not need masks. They should all have body cameras. They should all be held accountable for violating anyone's constitutional rights. Story 112. Unless they need a gas mask at that moment or it is extremely cold, a police officer should never wear a mask. Story 113. I think this is a good thing with some exceptions, such as during a global pandemic when a vaccine is not available. Story 114. I don't care if they wear masks. If they feel more comfortable with them on, so be it. The only thing I care about is that people shouldn't have to pay the lawsuits from police enforcement. Those costs should come from pensions. Story 115. Unless there is a unique situation, the only reason they would hide their faces is because they know what they are doing is wrong or illegal. Story 116. Becoming a police officer is a choice, and having power over others should come with responsibility. If you are doing nothing wrong, there is no reason to conceal your identity. If you do not like it, do not go into law enforcement. Story 117. The bill for those who want to see the exact text. Story 118. It is objectively necessary for our society to be democratic. I am not interested in debating this with those who support authorities abusing their power. Your local authority is not on your side. Accept this fact. Story 119. Wait. First they wanted to mandate face masks and now they want to ban them? Make up your mind, liberals. That was a joke, by the way. Story 120. I can see the need for some exceptions, but overall I do not see why law enforcement needs masks in the United States. Story 121. If you have to wear a mask to hide your identity, then you have hesitations about the cause you are supporting. If you truly believe in your cause, then you should have nothing to hide and stand by your convictions. Story 122. I'm in favor of that, except for the clear masks on their riot and motorcycle helmets. Not sure how you would word it on their tear gas masks. I think we should do like the United Kingdom and make them wear their badge number in large font on both sides when in uniform. For example, badge number 8719. Story 123. It should be a felony, not a misdemeanor, and should be considered a sentence enhancement for any illegal actions performed by the officer while attempting to operate under the authority of law while avoiding accountability. Story 124. They were all complaining they could not breathe during coronavirus, so I think we are doing something really nice for them. I would not want them dying on the job. That would be very sad. Story 125. I see many popular and controversial arguments, and I am left wondering about the medical aspect. It seems we have completely forgotten that getting a cough in the face is not as innocent as it appears. For me, this would be a reason to oppose this law because, as I understand it, there is no exception for any transparent type of mask, regardless of whether it is sufficiently protective. I may not like pigs, but there are minimum standards. Story 126. They have too much authority to be hiding behind a mask. They should be fully seen, and their markings, such as badges, names, and departments, should be fully visible. Story 127. If they are doing nothing wrong and upholding the law, then there should be no reason to cover their faces. Story 128. I think they should be able to, but they should also have their name and badge number always visible from the front and back. Story 129. They should never wear face masks, period. Furthermore, the police should have their cameras on at all times when on duty. Story 130. If you are not ashamed of what you are doing, you should not have to hide your face. The police are meant to protect people, not attack them. If they are scared of being exposed for their actions when people see those actions, then those actions are wrong. Story 131. You can now be abducted off the streets by mask-wearing thugs, detained with no legal representation, and sent to an internment camp in another country without justification or recourse. This is the work of a fascist regime. It is likely that even the election was rigged and that a foreign power compromised the president. The president's only job was as an actor and a criminal. What happened? Story 132. Considering two people were just killed by a person pretending to be a police officer, yes, let's aim for more transparency, not less. Story 133. Police need to be immediately identifiable for reasons of accountability. I understand that they dislike this, but it is necessary. Badge numbers should be displayed in a clearly visible font and color on both the front and back. No masks. If masking is required for health reasons, officers should be required to remove the mask for photographs. Failure to display the badge number or displaying a false one should be a felony and grounds for immediate termination. Additionally, there should be a national registry of law enforcement officers with a permanent record of all complaints and administrative punishments. Story 134. This should be standard nationwide. We honestly should not even have to make a law. It should be common practice. We already deal with police officers overstepping and abusing their power frequently. That is the reason there have been strong efforts to require body cameras. Even now, there are fights to get those turned off. If you cannot show your face and produce paperwork to justify your presence, you have no right to detain somebody on the street. This is actual insanity. Story 135. Mask use can be justified in some cases, but there must be another way to identify the officer. Some countries mandate large numbers on helmets and riot shields. This way, officers can be easily identified from cameras later. Story 136. What about a law that, unless your body camera is on and footage is available for any court proceedings, the police officer is presumed to be in the wrong? Story 137. Just say it is for coronavirus disease 2019 protection and it should be fine. If law enforcement does not have to wear face coverings, does that mean others are forbidden to wear them as well? Story 138. You cannot have people who are supposed to be enforcing the laws wearing masks so they can break the very laws they are supposed to be enforcing. Story 139. If you are not committing a crime, then you have nothing to hide, right? Isn't that what these police officers say? They should cover their faces. Don't most criminals and gangsters subscribe to this practice? Criminals with badges are still criminals. Covering their faces protects them. Story 140. Face covered, no badge, no name tag. I do not stop for unmarked patrol cars either. It is better to shoot first. Do not need another Minnesota. Story 141. In Washington, they have to wear body cameras too. Avoid masks, especially with individuals impersonating police officers to assassinate politicians and extremists pretending to be immigration and customs enforcement. Story 142. If they are doing nothing wrong, then they have nothing to worry about. As in, if you have nothing to hide, then just show us your face, phone, identification, let us search the car and house. Story 143. Those who cannot be identified cannot be held accountable. For important public-facing jobs such as police work, it is essential to be visible. If they do not like it, just remember it is only a job. Story 144. Really, what it does is establish the rule of law in the courts. If a person is taken, They can ask who is responsible for moving person A. Now, they know who the masked people are and can file criminal charges against the federal agents. This will make the Immigration and Customs Enforcement federal agents think twice before wearing a mask again. Now they have multiple misdemeanor charges filed against them in California. Story 145. I can see using masks in restricted, extremely limited circumstances, such as working against organized crime and transnational criminal organizations. But street cops, patrol officers, masked unknowns anonymously brutalizing and abducting people on the street, that works against everything that contributes to a healthy democracy. It actively undermines everything that allows freedom and liberty to flourish. If someone is advocating for it, then there is something they are hiding, and it is most likely illegal and absolutely unethical. Story 146. As long as criminals receive extra charges for wearing a face mask, I am okay with this law. Do not go after the police officers and ignore the criminals. Story 147. Since certain law enforcement officers wear masks, have no uniform or badge numbers, and refuse to identify themselves, it makes sense. Story 148. If you have to cover your face, you are probably up to something suspicious. If you will not go without a face covering, we know you are up to something suspicious. Story 149. It depends on the details. Can they wear a face mask when they are sick, the way we all did during coronavirus disease 2019? Because everyone should be doing that. Story 150. Honestly, I am shocked that one of these anonymous individuals who refuse to identify themselves has not been shot, considering how many gun owners there are in the United States. Maybe that is why they target cities in democratic states. If California repeals the ban on open carry and passes stand your ground laws, then these raids will change. Story 151. The only reason a United States police officer should wear a mask on duty, unless there is a pandemic, is if they are an undercover officer involved in conventional police work and are wearing the mask to avoid being identified as a police officer. Story 152. Why wear masks if you believe you are on the right side of history? Only criminals wear masks before committing crimes. Story 153. People who refuse to wear masks may do so to avoid being recognized by others when they are off duty. Story 154. Great. They should also have to patrol the town where they live, not a poor town an hour away from their nice neighborhood. That way, they will not look at the citizens as if they are cockroaches. Story 155. Good start, but not far enough. Arresting officers should be uniformed and badged, and vehicles should be marked. Plainclothes police officers can be used, but they need to have a uniformed unit nearby to identify the situation as official rather than appearing as kidnappings. Story 156. I am really confused about why they do not have to show the warrant. Showing the warrant would ease my mind more than the mask situation. However, the mask situation is very unsettling. Story 157. Have them wear a QR code on their back, chest, and on every side of each vehicle that provides all their information. At this point, a little accountability is the only thing they understand. Story 158. I mentioned it in another thread, but let these individuals have their masks while providing them with something equivalent to a football jersey, featuring their name and badge number clearly printed on the front and back. Make it a serious offense to wear anyone else's uniform. Story 159. Police groups warn that unmasking might expose officers to threats, harassment, or retaliation, especially given heightened tensions around immigration and protests. Story 160. Masks, except in health crises, are for Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan. We are supposed to be the land of the free. Story 161. Love it. When Immigration and Customs Enforcement wears them, it is because they know what they are doing is illegal. They both should have transparency. Story 162. It should be the bare minimum for all law enforcement, federal or state, in most circumstances, in my opinion. Without any sort of government-issued identification, how are we supposed to know if we are not being kidnapped by people just pretending to be law enforcement? Look at what happened in Minnesota, and that is with someone impersonating a law enforcement branch that typically has government-issued identification. Regarding Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which I know this probably will not apply to, sadly, before someone says, They are only going after illegal immigrants. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has also detained American citizens by mistake. Most states have right to defend laws, which obviously apply if you are being kidnapped, so the lack of identification is also putting law enforcement at risk. If you fought back but the people trying to seemingly abduct you turn out to be law enforcement, you can be charged with assault for literally trying not to be kidnapped. Honestly, the lack of identification, let alone not always producing a warrant, is ridiculous. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.